Woo! So, Laurie, we're live. We're finally live. And you know, it's been a long time since you and I have spoken, I have to say.
It has, and it feels so short and long ago. We're in a bit of a mind warp from COVID, I think, and so much has changed in such a short period of time. But I love this conversation that we're about to have because I think everything needs to be revisited. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but I think there's another reason, because when you and I start talking, it then tends to like disappear off into various different tangents of innovation and the future and where are we all going as a
Yeah,
society. So I think we have to tailor it a little bit today. So
sure.
um, we'll go there. But anyway, so why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit in terms of, you know, who you are, who you work for, what's your role, just so people who perhaps don't know who the famous Laurie is will know a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thanks, James. Well, my name is Laurie Rowlandson. I'm the Global Senior Vice President of Strategy and Innovation for a company called BGIS. We're a small global boutique facilities management firm of about 9,500 employees globally, operating primarily in Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And we're an engineering led facilities management company, but my role is the sponsor of innovation, and I help manage our own real estate portfolio as well as sponsor innovation and our workplace practice. My role is global, but I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and I have a Canadian passport.
If only I wished I'd had a Canadian passport for the
You're welcome
past.
anytime. Come on over. You're welcome
You know,
anytime.
I think I'm too old now, and I'm not sure what my skill set would be. So as much as my wife and I would love to get over there, I'm not sure you'd have us anymore. Anyway, but anyway, thank you, Laurie, and I love the fact you've called BGIS small, because being brutally honest, I think there are many people would look at you and say you guys are massive. So it's very grounding to hear you say that. But just for those of you who perhaps maybe have not watched one of these interviews before, and it's your first time, just a little bit of context. My name is James Dearsley. I'm the co-founder at Unisu, which is a procurement platform looking for sort of technology solutions to help the real estate environment. And one of the things that I feel quite passionately about, having started this narrative of technological change over 10 years ago, is that I think the narrative has stayed on the same course for that long. And I think we now really need to delve into the details of really what is happening with change and transformation in the real estate industry. Let's have an understanding about leadership and an understanding about culture, because ultimately that really is what should be happening. And what I really want to try and do with this series, it's the first series, but what I want to try and do with this series is to give people ideas and roadmaps from leaders that I know in my network from all around the world, that I already know are doing really cool things, and the companies that they work for have started on this journey. By no means they're finished, but they've started, which hopefully starts to give people that roadmap for them to be encouraged to do more of this stuff. And just for sort of context for the next half an hour or so, Laurie and I will be talking in quite a structured format. So wherever you're watching, whether this be on LinkedIn or Twitter or actually on the Unisu platform, I won't be taking sort of the live interactive questions that I normally do, but I might save that to the end. So if you have got any questions for Laurie in this, do you just pop it in the comments or in the chat box, wherever it might be, and I will have a look at that at the end and draw some questions out. But really, this interview will take a format of 3 basic steps, which is now a real quick fire sort of wordplay game that Laurie and I will just start with and just get it all going into some sort of short term questions where it's sort of like a 1 or 2 minute answers that I hope Laurie will be able to provide us, and then go into a little bit more sort of a discussion format with some longer form questions and answers at the end. So, Laurie, there we go. That's our format that we're going to have. So I hope we're okay with that. So without further ado, let's go into our sort of a little bit of wordplay just to get us moving on this discussion. So, Laurie, I'm going to give you 10 single words, and I want you to say to me the first thing that comes into your brain from these words that I give you, if that's okay. Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
Cool. I have to say you're in a massive advantage being English speaking, because I have to say it is a bit of a challenge with people with a second language. So hopefully we'll get on here. Right. So, number one, what does prop tech mean to you? One word back.
Chaos.
Oh, brilliant. Culture.
Culture magnet.
Magnet. I'm going to explore that a little bit more later on. What does customer mean to you?
Complex.
Oh, that, do you know what? I really like that. Others have sort of said allies and friends, and complex is a really good answer. Data.
Insight.
Insight. Values.
Human.
What does leadership mean to you?
Responsibility.
Responsibility to whom?
Responsibility to employees, your industry, and your shareholders. You have a leadership responsibility and accountability.
You do. And funnily enough, that shareholder point is a really valuable one, and something I've been reading a lot about recently when innovation values mix with sort of that clash between what the company's trying to do, what the customers want you to do, and ultimately what you've got to deliver to shareholders. So that's a great point. Two more to come. Strategy.
Map.
And last one, innovation.
Practical.
Practical. I really like it. Cool. Well, that was nice and easy, right? That was cool.
It's fun.
There were some
Word
good words in
association.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what. No, one more. Competitor.
Everywhere and anywhere. I know
Everywhere
that's
and
not one
anywhere.
word.
And you know what?
Meaning there are competitors coming from places that we don't expect. So competitors are coming from places that we didn't think are traditional.
Yeah. And you know, in transformation theory, we're talking about asymmetric competitors. And
Exactly. Like tech companies competing with banks, for example. You never thought that a tech company would be competing with banks, but they are.
it's fascinating, isn't it? I find asymmetric as a concept absolutely brilliant. And I think this is where you need strong leadership, because ultimately you have to understand that those competitors you have today are not going to be the competitors you've got tomorrow. And if you stand still and just compete against people next to you and make incremental improvements all the time, you're going to be outgunned by people who are coming completely left field. And as you say, are coming from anywhere, which is a brilliant point.
And please syndicate that message to every procurement organization, James. We have to make them a lot more comfortable with buying solutions and disruptive solutions specifically, and thinking outside traditional commoditized silos. Because otherwise, those procurement organizations are going to create a cooling effect on the progress of their companies.
Yeah, because they're doing things the same way that they've always
Yeah,
done, in the same manner, in the same process, right?
you got it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, look, let's boil into a couple of those points that you raised, and sort of have a slightly more sort of a monologue feel to this, with giving you a little bit more of an expansion on some of the things that you've
Okay.
said, because I think there's some really important points. So you talk about culture as being a magnet. So I would really appreciate it if you could just expand out to me. You know, what does culture really mean to you?
Culture is that invisible feeling that makes you feel drawn to that organization or another individual. It's that intangible that you know in your guts just feels right. It is social norms and it's integrity and actions that you demonstrate, but it's that je ne sais quoi we say in French, that really it's that magic ingredient. It's the same difference that I think of between going to a Disney park and some other general amusement park, is that there's some kind of magic, intangible magic that happens. That, they both have great rides, they both have great junk food, but there's something magic that happens at a Disney, for example. A lot of that is driven by culture and experience. And that's what draws great talent to an organization and retains it.
And something I think which is being challenged at the moment, I would suggest that post this pandemic period that we're in, culture is probably one of the things that is being most challenged with this sort
Yes.
of contradiction between working from home, working from the office, and where these people live. And they say that culture is probably one of the hardest things to embed if you are not surrounded by and brought together with colleagues and peers and management. Um, any opinion on that out of interest?
I totally agree. I think HR organizations have been turned upside down. How do you create culture in a hybrid work environment, which I don't think is going to go away for a long time? I think that there will be some balancing, but HR organizations right now are quite vexed as to how do they create that magnet to their company when people are working remote. How do you make sure that people feel connected and appreciated? And if 60% of work happens outside of the office, how do you do that going forward? And so there's a lot of rush to be able to figure that out.
Absolutely. And funny enough, while you were just saying that, I was actually just looking at the latest blog post from Anthony Slumbers, who many of you will probably know of, and who's just put out his latest blog post, and he talks about flexibility and resilience being two of the most critical characteristics that we have to have in our organizations at the minute, which I think Anthony, as ever, is quite bang on with his qualitative perspectives of the sector. And I might also suggest that with these challenges that we're facing as an organization, when it comes to culture, it certainly demands strong leadership. So I'm really interested in this sense as to, given your position, Laurie, what does leadership mean to you within that confines of BGIS?
Well, I think it means really listening to your team members and really understanding what their needs are. I would start with that, a very people centric view of what they need and eliminating those barriers to productivity, trusting your employees to understand what they want and what makes them productive, and enabling that. So, very much an enabling leadership mentality versus a top down, I feel is really key to success in leadership in the future. So not entirely democratized, but very a lot more transparency and a leadership structure that's more about enabling. I think the other dimension is holding everyone accountable for outcomes in a very different way than we have in the past. And that whole system has to change as well. And they go hand in hand, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's I'm noting that down because that is something I think we will see more and more about as the industry starts to understand a little bit of how to um, really democratize the aspect of innovation and culture within everybody within the organization. Because in the past, I think the very set sort of linear form of leadership has meant that incentives have been pretty easy to instill, whereas now we've got much more agile leadership, which is having to come into our sector, and as a consequence, that point about holding people accountable to outcomes is going to be very prescient, I believe. So, with leadership in mind, what tip would you be giving these people who want to take on these leadership roles in innovation within our real estate sector?
I would say there's a few factors. So, specifically around leadership and innovation, my advice would be think in Lego blocks. So, one of my pet peeves, as you know, you and I have talked about this many times, is these great big disruptive ideas that are big, overwhelming topics that people don't know how to get started, where to begin. My advice is chop it up into steps, and I call them Lego. So everybody's digital transformation roadmap should be like Lego. You make decisions in pieces that stack up to a bigger vision. So don't get paralyzed with the big vision. Make little decisions that add up to progress. Otherwise, you're going to get perfection paralysis and everything will have changed by the time you make a decision. So make little decisions forward in bites, but bites forward. The second thing I would say is use an evidence-based approach. So use lots of pilots to be able to do proof of concept. It's very hard to visualize a lot of these things that seem so ethereal or foreign, especially disruptive innovations or technologies. Do lots of pilots. Use an evidence-based approach to understanding if that solution is relevant for you before you scale. And if you have data from a pilot, it's much easier to get an evidence-based business case to be able to expand. Otherwise, just asking for a big lump of money for a programmatic change is less likely to succeed. So anchor it into what matters and do it in steps enabled by pilots and lots of evidence-based, fact-based, pilot-based approach. So I work with engineers. We like to measure everything and have evidence for everything. So that's been a key success. Otherwise, somebody like me would never relate to an engineering culture. We have to use an evidence-based approach, closed loop approach to innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, evidence-based data backing, I mean, that's all fantastic advice. And it also, when you talk about data, and you and I have talked about you being very engineering-led previously, and I always find that interesting, and I keep being reminded when you tell me this, but data for me is one of the great pillars of the digital transformation journey. So just in reference to, I suppose, your own digital transformation journey, what does it mean to you, in short, that period of digital transformation within the real estate sector, I might add?
Yeah, digital transformation. Again, it's hard to get approval for a big transformation. So what we like to do is line it up with a journey, like the Lego block literally approach. And we have the greatest success tying it into the capital plan. So we have an expression that we use. Every time you touch a building is a chance to make it smarter. Every time you touch a building, it's a chance to make it more sustainable, etc. So we really do a good job looking at how could we leverage the capital that's already set aside and just tune it up a little bit. It's already set aside. So when you replace lighting, make sure that it's smart lighting. Don't replace it with the same standard. I know that sounds pretty basic, but I do see a lot of organizations replacing or fitting things up based on old standard without the opportunity to reinvent it. Every time you touch a building is a chance to make it smarter. So really look at aligning with the capital plan, because over a 5 or 10-year period, the chances are you touch a major building system at least once, and it's the opportunity to leverage your existing capital and make it smart.
Yeah, great advice. So look, two really quick hopefully quick fire answers on here. I'm a big reader. You can probably tell with the amount of different books behind me. But if you were to give a fellow or a future leader a book to read that has helped you on your journey, which one would it be, and why?
Well, my goodness, there's so many books. If you know, you and I have chat, I'm such an avid reader. But if I could pick one right now, it would be kind of an oldie but a goodie. And that is Blue Ocean Strategy, which has just recently been reinvented. And the book does a very articulate job at identifying competitors from places that you didn't expect. Thinking in New Boxes is another one that I really love as well. But both of those books are really take your blinders off from traditional competitive threats and really make sure you're aware of disruption. So that's one dimension one. The second dimension that those books do a really good job of is really differentiating your voice in a sea of sameness. And it's really important that you have something that stands out that your competitors cannot claim name to. Those same words cannot come out of the mouth of your competitors. And if you don't have those ready, then you are at risk of being commoditized and you will not stand out. And then it's a race to the bottom on price. But there's a lot of things that you can do to really be self-aware of disruptive influences and set yourself apart. So, like I said, an oldie but a goodie, but Blue Ocean Strategy has really come into its own again in a time that we're in a boom, and an innovation boom right now.
Yeah, no, totally. I hope. Well, I hope I'm not too old yet, but I hope I'm becoming a goodie. So we might be able to get there. But you mentioned two really interesting points on that. You again talk about what we've discussed already, which is about this asymmetric competitor coming in, which I think is very valid in these books, and also that what I suppose in the startup world we would often, or venture capitalists would call, you have to build a defensive moat around your organization and your company, which makes it totally separate to everybody else and something that they cannot replicate and they cannot repeat. So that's some really good points on that. And then lastly on this little bit, in terms of, this is a first series. I'm doing 10 interviews of people that I know are doing cool things. If you were to recommend to me another leader for me to interview from September onwards, when I'm going to repeat this journey again and look for other really good leaders, who would you recommend I be speaking to in here? And again, why?
I have a couple. It's hard to narrow it down because I have so many work heroes, but I'll give you a couple to choose from. The first one is Rex Miller, who is the author of several very important books in real estate, but has done one of the most articulate jobs of explaining the importance of wellness and well-being and its impact on productivity at work, as well as design features and just the whole program at real estate. So Rex Miller is one. Another one is, one more on Rex Miller, is because he's the first one that really could help me understand the wrapping my head around the measures of productivity and wellness. And I get asked about that all the time, especially in the hybrid work environment. Very good job with Rex Miller. The second person you should consider is Brett King, who's written, again, a number of articulate books, one called Banking 4.0, which is a great book and talks about the transformations and headwinds faced by the finance industry. And the third one, again, probably one of my favorites in our real estate industry, is Dror Poleg, who wrote a book called Rethinking Real Estate and has tracked a number of really important trends and disruptions that will impact real estate. And you could go in many different directions with him, but all three of them are really worthy.
No, that's great advice, and certainly I can speak for Dror, as I've known him for many years, and his insights are. I think what I quite like is they're not often core real estate, and he brings expertise from outside to allow you to apply, which I think is great. That was fantastic, and I hope if you are watching this on the live format or actually the full interview that those recommendations from Laurie are absolutely tip top. So I hope you get from that. So Laurie, sort of coming to this final section where I want to try and explore some of these ideas in a little bit more detail. And I think based on what we've talked about, I'm going to come at this from a journey that you've been on, but also I would like to actually have a look at what BGIS have done, because there's some really interesting things that they've come up about. So I'm really interested in the lessons that you've learned on your own sort of transformation journey, perhaps with or before BGIS. What have you learned from this journey that you can pass on to others?
Yeah, I would say my biggest advice is make sure you have a clear line of sight to what you're solving. I think too often we get shiny object syndrome, and we get a buffet of solutions paraded before us without thinking about what problem we want to solve or what data outcome we need and why. And that, again, sounds very fundamental, but you would be surprised. It's so easy to jump to the shiny object and not anchor it in what you're solving to help with prioritization, to help with business cases and approval. Very important to understand what you're solving so that you can really make sure that the solution you're considering is going to give you the data outcomes that you're looking for.
But let's just explore that for a second, because I would suggest it's human nature to go for the shiny object syndrome, which is what the magpies do. They come down, they swoop, and they get a nice shiny bit of jewelry and they fly off. From your experience, how would you advise companies really start to understand it from a problem first perspective, not a solution first perspective?
The key is really making sure we're forcing ourselves to the discipline of understanding what are our objectives, what do we want to achieve as a company, and then how do we measure success? Measurement is key because you need data to do the measurement. And then the third is, does that solution fit into our priorities, and does it produce the data that we need to measure success? So there's no point in buying, lighting that, can sense if there's people in the room if it's not counting, for example. If it's really about capacity that you're looking for, then the solution is not going to give you the data output you're looking. So making sure you're specifically understanding what are your corporate objectives and what are the priorities there? What are you trying to solve? And then how do you measure success? Then the solution you pick has to be able to plug into those metrics and contribute to the metrics that you are seeking.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. But with that in mind, let us go back in time a little bit, and perhaps this is more about BGIS than yourself. I don't know. I could be entirely wrong. But do you actually have a defined strategy that deals with this innovative world that we are in and coming into? And if so, how did that develop, and how are you operating it now?
We do have a very defined strategy, again, engineers. It's very closed loop.
Of course.
So
How
it's like
silly of me to suggest you didn't.
it's like a flywheel. Yeah, I would never get away with it if I didn't have something. It's a very well documented flywheel, and the flywheel consists of chevrons, and it ends up looking a bit like a daisy as well. So you sometimes call it the innovation daisy, but it starts with an idea. What is the art of the possible? Then looking for pilots, helping to implement, providing the resources to test and pilot. How do we measure success? Holding them accountable for producing innovations, and then reviewing and making sure it was successful. And how do you, how do you expand it, or lessons learned? It's a very closed loop ecosystem. It's supported by the top expectations of certain percentage of innovations that must be produced in case studies each year. And then throughout the entire life cycle of the innovation, from idea to implementation, we have a number of resources available for our accounts and our customers to make that happen. Because you know what, James, what we found was a lot of clients get stuck, even ourselves, at the idea zone. And everyone is afraid to cross that threshold into implementation. And then how do you actually scale it? So another one of my pet peeves is idea theater, where you go to a conference, everybody's talking about all these great ideas, but nobody's actually doing them. So again, working with engineers, you never get away with talking about things and never doing them. And they measure the fact and how often you've done them and how well you've done them. So our innovation process is like a flywheel that's held accountable by our CEO. So we are required to implement one innovation per quarter per client. And then each country is required to produce a new innovation per quarter. And our CEO looks over the shoulder of all of our accounts and our country presidents to make sure that happens. Then we write them up into case studies, we share them with other countries, other accounts, and then it just continues to compound. So a very closed loop approach to our innovation process, I think, has been a success. We call it practical innovation. We also make sure that they're innovations that can be improved in Lego approach and steps forward, so that it continues to build momentum and gets out of the idea zone into the results zone.
And I'm so pleased that you talked about your CEO leading on that strategic direction of the strategy, because that's one of the questions I often ask, because I sometimes feel that unless it's led from the top, it never gets put through, and it has enough clout to really impact on an organization. So I'm really pleased you addressed that. I suppose maybe a penultimate question before I look and see if there's been anything coming in. In terms of creating an innovation culture, I would really like to boil into, how does your CEO bring the organization together? And perhaps before I ask you very directly about it, I'd just like to commend BGIS, because, and I haven't done this on any of these interviews yet to date, but obviously I have to do a lot of research and try and understand you. Fortunately, I understand you because I've known you for long enough, but BGIS, I didn't. But what really struck me about creating this culture of innovation and values within the organization, and I'm just going to share them a screen, and I don't know if this is going to work because I've never shared my screen on this before. So do tell me if you're now seeing the BGIS website. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, so what really impressed me here, and this is all about culture, is right from the very start on your website, you're talking about leading through innovation. I go to the About Us page, which is something, obviously, which I always think people really underestimate in terms of website navigation, really talking about, focusing on delivering disruptive business solutions for clients. You're talking about innovation and high performance again. I must commend what, that sort of cultural shift of bringing innovation through an organization starts, publicly talking about it. But how else is BGIS doing that throughout the organization? I'm really interested in that.
No, that's a great question. And it has to be something more than just on a website or on the torn poster above the photocopier, right?
Yeah, it's lip service, right? I mean,
You got
anyone
it.
can say that, but I have to be honest, I'm not seeing it. So that's why I was so amazed that someone's actually doing it on a website. But don't let me interrupt.
We're doing it. We have our innovation portal, which is a resource available internally to our team members, has almost 300 case studies of real things that we've done at BGIS, organized by sector, organized by topic, or organized by geography. But in answer to your direct original question, Gord does a good job of setting out the expectation. That's where I come in to help light up the ecosystem of innovation. So Gord sets the expectation. Well, an expectation without the resources to be able to deliver is a bit like one hand clapping, right? So you have to help our accounts be successful. So at every cycle, from helping them imagine the art of the possible, educating our clients, providing the resources necessary to help them understand how it could be, to enacting the pilots is where my team comes in to help make the idea real. So, but Gord holds them accountable for making sure that they are pulling in that direction and they have output. And I am the internal advisor and coach to help them get there, both from an industry ideation perspective, like an in-house consultant for our clients and for our accounts, to really guide them and help them get there. Because what I often see is the account leader superpower is operational excellence. They need to manage the contract, and they're great at it. They manage the P&L. They make sure that they're hitting on all of the client's objectives. So their superpower is operations. Their superpower is not necessarily innovation. And again, sometimes you get both, but not always. Again, usually their superpower is innovation. So you need to bring in specialized resources to help them have the capacity and the tools and the mindset to be able to foster that. So it's very much a collaborative experience with our innovation consultants and our various subject matter experts and our account leaders. And together, that triumvirate really makes it take it from idea to implementation.
And you talk about providing guidance to clients. What sort of form is that guidance? I mean, obviously, I followed your newsletter every week. I mean, is that a form of the guidance that you give, or is this something completely different?
No, the newsletter is just my own nerdy thing that I do off to the side because it just keeps my brain going. But what we do is each year we do like an annual performance review, like you would do with your employees. What are the goals that we want to achieve on the account this year? And they're aligned with our clients. So if the client cares about sustainability, employee experience, et cetera, it's risk management, whatever they care about. Then what we do is we identify initiatives that line up to exactly what our clients are looking for, whatever they care about. It starts with understanding what the client cares about and how they prioritize things. Because the last thing you want to do is give them a buffet of innovations that they don't want to approve or they're not interested in. So we really listen to what their goals are, where their head is at, and they go through ups and downs. What do they care about in this fiscal year? And then we identify a queue of initiatives. We present those to the client, they get approved, and then we go forward with pilots. So it's very much customer centric. Our innovation is very much centered around what our clients' objectives are and how they measure success. And then that allows us to prioritize relevant innovations. And that's why our track record is so strong for producing outcomes, because we don't just throw things at the wall and hope one of them sticks. It's a very customized presentation. It's a customized buffet of ideas. So we throw in a few new ideas of things that maybe they haven't thought about, but we also give some mainstream ones that we know will deliver progress against what they care about. And that also helps us make sure we're not wasting time in the approval cycle or get to the 11th hour and then them say, it's not a priority. So
Yeah.
it's very much centered around customers.
And so I suppose I have to look into this question with such an innovative attitude and such a collaborative attitude around innovation. There must have been times where either clients have requested something that hasn't quite worked, or you've looked at initiative that didn't go as you planned it to do. Have you got any examples where you can share to help others understand that you can learn from these mistakes and actually evolve the business to be in a better place because of them?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the catchphrase is, oh, everybody fail fast. But trust me, nobody likes to fail and nobody likes to plan to fail. So we try to mitigate that as much as possible. So one of the things I mentioned to you is we have a very client objective centric approach. But you would be surprised, we do have a lot of clients that don't have clearly defined objectives or goals. They would rather jump to the solutions, and maybe they don't even have a good line of sight on how they measure success. But we force that discipline. We provide facilitation to try to, I'd say, force that. If they're unwilling to articulate that, which happens sometimes,
Yeah, I
we
bet it does.
it happens, and they say, that we push them into an area of maybe they're not comfortable with that for whatever reason. No problem. Hey, we have plan B, or maybe plan C by now. We give them, I call them a buffet of choices. So we have a configuration of topics. So like sustainability in retail or retail of the future. We'll pick some theme. We call them art of the possible themes. And then under that theme, we will identify a typical asset and here's 30 things, 30 different solutions, point solutions that you could be doing to affect progress. And here's the categories that they affect progress. So sort of show the solutions, what areas that they affect progress, typical benefits, and put them in front of the clients. We work through a workshop to prioritize them. Some end up in the priority quadrant, some end up in the lower quadrant. Every client, it's different. But then the exercise is great because it forces us and the client, it forces the client really to help us prioritize which of those solutions are the most meaningful to them, and it educates them on which ones in the process. But again, it's always anchored in objectives. So sometimes
Yeah.
they don't know what they want, but if you show them in an organized pattern and you force prioritization, again, it forces them out of the idea zone into taking some pilots.
So in your sort of role as that, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, a service provider,
Yeah.
you are governed really by how well prepared your customers are, and how, is there a discrepancy and a misalignment around what you think can be achieved and what they want, and as a consequence, you're almost having to go back a step, become almost more consultative in your approach to
Yeah.
how your clients are going to be able to deal with it. Is that a fair enough assumption?
Yeah,
Or
we
search?
have clients that are in a wide spectrum of maturity. So you share with them, you educate them in what they could be doing and what the impact is, and that helps them form their opinion. So a lot of what we do, it's an educational process as well as the art of the possible, and that's why we call it that. And around a whole spectrum of topics, we ask them what themes that they're interested in, what topics, and then we go to them with the buffet of art of the possible, and they appreciate it because it helps them be up to date on the buffet of solutions that are available. But then it helps them pick which ones are the most relevant in a collaborative process, and then we help them through the implementation. It's usually pilot after that is the next step based on
Yeah,
that.
as you said, loads of pilots backed by evidence-based results,
Yeah,
which then feed into
you
the
got
rest.
it. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I suppose my last question, for this and for everybody watching, before I just go and have a little look at LinkedIn and Twitter and all those places to see if there's been any questions as we're talking. I'm very conscious that a forward-thinking company like BJS, and you in particular, Laurie, are now in that realm of always be innovating, always be evolving. So I'd like to ask you for your advice for the leaders to say, well, how do you keep innovating? Because I think a lot of people think it's quite black and white, which is we're just going to innovate and then we stop and then we reflect. So how should a leader approach this way of constantly evolving that innovative journey they're on?
I would say it's never losing sight of what you're trying to solve. That always has to be in the front of your mind. There will be different innovations and solutions that pop up that might be better, that get better and better over time, but never lose your eye on what you're trying to achieve at the end goal. And there might be multiple ways of solving that or better ways over time, but always do it aligned with what the finish line is intended to be. And again, I know that sounds like we're explaining air, but sometimes we get too invested in a specific solution when we should be really ultimately invested in the outcome that it's achieving. And we need to build ourselves for more transience in that way because technology is changing so quickly. So how can we, get to that outcome faster and in a more agile way?
And that comes back to having the right culture, which is having an organization built around constantly questioning, constantly evolving, constantly referring to customers and clients and finding out what they're looking for and why they need it, I suppose. So, Laurie, thank you for that. That's very incredibly, brilliant advice, really. Let me just, I'm not expecting, to be honest, anybody to be watching this live. I don't massively push it out. So if there are any questions, then that's great. If not, then we can really nicely finish up and just enjoy everything as it's coming through. Perfect. So no, there are no questions that are coming through, but I expect that to come afterwards. So for those of you who are watching this thank you for joining me in the longer form recording of this. And I just want to thank you, Laurie, while we're here for joining me and giving us such great expertise about how you and BGIS are adapting to this new world that we live in. So thank you, Laurie.
Oh, James, it's my pleasure. And I want to just do a thank you to you for your great service that you do for our industry. I've known you for a number of years. And thank you for being such a articulate voice in our industry. It's a pleasure to support you.
I could have cut you off, but I didn't. I guess I need that on the stream. No, Laurie, I'm going to end the stream and everyone joining us. So thank you for that feedback. It's really kind. And look forward to the next in the series.